The blizzard was so severe that even trained rescue teams refused to go out that night. But Navy SEAL Ethan Cole didn't hesitate when he spotted a faint shadow moving through the snow, an old woman, barely able to stand, her thin coat soaked and frozen stiff, and beside her a German shepherd, limping, shivering, yet refusing to leave her side. Ethan's heart pounded. Why were they standing outside in a blizzard? He sprinted toward them. But the moment he reached the pair, the dog suddenly stepped in front of the woman and growled not out of aggression, but out of desperation. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. And that's when Ethan saw it. A classified military tracking tag hidden beneath the dog's collar. A tag belonging to a program that didn't officially exist. When he lifted the old woman, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. Please don't let them find us. By morning, the truth about who she was and what she was running from would shock the entire country. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The storm sirens began wailing long before the first snowflake touched the ground. Most people in the small mountain town were already inside, locking their doors, sealing their windows, and praying the power wouldn't go out again. But inside a dimly lit cabin on the outskirts, Navy SEAL Ethan Cole stood motionless beside the radio, listening to the emergency broadcast crackle through the static. The dispatcher repeated the same warning over and over. This is a life-threatening blizzard. Visibility 0. Winds dangerously high. All rescue operations suspended until further notice. Ethan exhaled slowly. A storm like this could bury a vehicle in minutes, freeze a man solid, erase footprints as quickly as they were made. He knew the mountains better than anyone. He had survived cold oceans, whiteout missions, and nights where the temperature felt like it was trying to peel the skin off his bones. But this storm felt different. It sounded angrier, heavier, almost like the wind was warning him to stay inside. He grabbed his jacket from a chair and turned toward the window. Outside, the sky was no longer sky. It was a roaring swirl of white, thick snow blasting sideways as if shot from a cannon. Branches snapped like bones. Trees groaned under the weight. Every instinct told him to remain indoors, to ride it out like everyone else in town. But then the radio sputtered again. A new voice, a trembling one. Dispatch, this is Ranger Outpost 3. We think someone's still out there. A civilian, possibly two. Our drones picked movement on the North Ridge before the system shut down. Ethan's jaw tightened. The North Ridge was nearly impossible to access, even in good weather. In a storm like this, it was a death trap. The dispatcher immediately tried to shut the idea down. Negative. No team can be sent out. Conditions too dangerous. We can't risk more casualties. But Ethan had already stopped listening. Civilians alone in this blizzard? No shelter? No gear? That meant minutes, maybe less. He felt a familiar pull in his chest, the same one that had pushed him into burning buildings, sinking boats, collapsing tunnels. The same instinct that had kept him alive all these years that he stepped outside. The cold punched him instantly, searing his lungs, numbing his fingers even through gloves. Snowflakes hit his face like sand. But he pushed forward, securing his hood, narrowing his eyes against the biting wind. Someone needs help, he muttered to himself. And if no one else is going, I will. With that, Ethan locked the cabin door behind him and vanished into the blizzard. The blizzard grew worse with every step Ethan took. The wind screamed against his ears, drowning out every other sound except the crunch of snow beneath his boots. His flashlight barely cut through the swirling white, illuminating nothing but endless flakes whipping past like angry ghosts. He kept moving, checking the compass strapped to his wrist, forcing himself toward the direction of the North Ridge. If someone really was out here, they had no chance of finding shelter alone. Minutes dragged by. The cold bit deeper. Ethan's breath fogged, so thick it felt like he was exhaling smoke. Still, he pushed forward, every muscle tight, every sense alert. His training told him this was foolish. Visibility was near zero. His path unpredictable. Any wrong step could drop him into a hidden ravine. But something stronger than logic kept him going. Someone needed him. Nobody else was coming. Then, through the storm, he saw it. A flicker. A movement that didn't belong to the wind. He froze. Narrowed his eyes. The shape disappeared, swallowed by the wall of snow. For a moment, he wondered if it was just the storm playing tricks. But then it appeared again, a faint, trembling silhouette leaning heavily against the wind. Ethan's heart kicked. He raised his flashlight, angling it upward. The beam caught a figure, small, hunched, barely standing. An elderly woman. "Ma'am," Ethan shouted, his voice nearly torn apart by the storm. "Stay where you are." The woman didn't respond. She looked disoriented, her steps uneven, her arms hugging her chest as if she were trying to hold herself together. She swayed, taking one step then another, then nearly collapsing into the snow. Ethan pushed forward faster. But as he got closer, something else moved beside her. Something low to the ground. Something alive. A dog. A large German shepherd, its fur coated in frost, its body stiff with cold. The dog didn't run or bark. It simply stood beside the woman, refusing to leave her side, positioning itself between her and the full force of the wind. Its head was lowered, its body trembling, yet it kept pushing against her, keeping her upright. Ethan's breath caught. He had seen loyal partners before, but nothing quite like this. He reached out his hand, still a few feet away. "It's okay. I'm here to help." But the dog suddenly lifted its head, locking eyes with Ethan, eyes filled with desperation, fear, and something else. A warning. In that moment, Ethan realized this rescue was not going to be simple. Something was very, very wrong. Ethan moved swiftly toward the woman, but the moment he stepped closer, the German shepherd lunged a half step forward, planting itself between them. Its growl was low and strained, more protective than aggressive. The dog's legs were trembling, its breath visible in short, sharp bursts, yet it refused to back down. Snow clung to its fur in thick, icy patches, but its eyes burned with a fierce determination. "Don't touch her." Ethan lifted both hands slowly. "Easy, easy, boy. I'm here to help. She won't make it out here much longer." The dog's growl softened, but it didn't move. It watched him closely, as if trying to decide whether he was a threat or their only chance of surviving. The elderly woman suddenly swayed again. Her lips were blue, her eyes unfocused. For a moment, she looked at Ethan, through him, even, as if her mind was fading in and out. Then her knees buckled. No, Ethan surged forward. This time, the dog didn't block him. Instead, it let out a pained whine, pressing its nose against her falling shoulder as if trying to keep her upright. But the woman collapsed hard into the snow, her body limp, her breathing shallow. Ethan knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face, his fingers burning with cold. "Ma'am, stay with me," he said urgently. Her eyelids fluttered, barely opening. "I didn't think anyone would come," she whispered, each word breaking like ice. Ethan quickly assessed her, pulse weak, body dangerously cold, fingers stiff. She needed warmth, shelter, and medical attention immediately. If he didn't move fast, she wouldn't make it through the next hour. Then he felt something press against him. The dog. It nudged his arm, whining, almost begging him to do something. The fierce protectiveness was gone, replaced by desperate trust. As if the dog had finally chosen him. "It's okay, boy," Ethan murmured. "I've got her now." He slid his arms under the woman and gently lifted her against his chest. She was frighteningly light, like carrying snow itself. Her head fell against his shoulder, but just as he managed to stand, a sudden gust of wind slammed into them. Ethan staggered, tightening his hold. The dog barked sharply, circling him, pushing its body against his legs, guiding him, supporting him through the storm. Ethan glanced down at the dog, surprised by its determination. "You're not leaving her, are you?" The dog barked once, loud and clear, despite the storm. Not a threat, not fear, a promise. This wasn't just loyalty. It was something deeper, something urgent, something he didn't understand yet. And, whatever it was, it meant trouble. Ethan adjusted his grip on the unconscious woman, tightening the jacket around her frail shoulders as the blizzard clawed at them from every direction. He needed to get her out of the open, fast. But the storm was blinding, erasing every landmark he knew. Even with his training, navigating these mountains in a whiteout was like walking through a world made of smoke. One wrong direction, and they'd all be lost. The German shepherd stood beside him, shivering but alert, its ears pinned back against the wind. Ethan expected the dog to follow him back toward his cabin, but instead it suddenly darted forward, barking sharply. It stopped just a few feet ahead, turning back to him, eyes pleading, urging him to follow. Ethan frowned. "No, boy, we're going this way," he called over the wind, nodding toward the route he thought would lead home. But the dog barked again, louder, more urgent. It took a few quick steps in the opposite direction, then looked back at him, tail stiff, body tense. It wasn't just leading. It was insisting. Ethan hesitated. His instincts told him he should head west toward safety. But the dog seemed to believe otherwise, and he had learned long ago that animals sensed dangers humans didn't. Something was pushing the shepherd, something more powerful than fear or confusion. "All right," he muttered. "Show me." The dog moved immediately, pacing ahead through the snow, clearing a path with surprising strength. Ethan followed, cradling the woman carefully, trusting the only creature out here that wasn't fighting the storm, just pushing through it. The wind grew harsher, the snow deeper. Ethan's steps grew heavier with each passing minute. The grandmother's breaths were faint now, barely vibrating against his chest. He lowered his head to shield her face, whispering, "Hang on, just a little longer." Then, through the white haze, he saw something he didn't expect. A dark shape forming in the storm's curtain. The dog barked twice and ran ahead, disappearing into the blur. Ethan followed more quickly, his heart pounding, until the outline sharpened. A crooked wooden structure partially buried under snow. It was small, old, and barely standing, almost invisible to anyone who didn't already know it existed. A hidden shelter, hand-built, and clearly abandoned. The dog scratched at the door, whining anxiously. Ethan pulled it open with difficulty, snow spilling inside. A rush of slightly warmer, trapped air hit his face. Inside, he saw the remnants of a life someone had tried and failed to survive here with. "Is this where you brought her?" Ethan whispered. The dog lowered its head, not in shame, in memory, and Ethan realized this shelter wasn't just a place. It was a clue. Ethan ducked inside the small shelter, carrying the unconscious grandmother carefully in his arms. The moment he stepped in, the wind's roar softened, replaced by a stillness that felt almost eerie. The place was dim, lit only by the weak light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. Dust-coated old crates stacked against a corner, and a torn blanket lay on the floor beside a makeshift fire pit filled with ashes long cold. It was clear someone had been living here, surviving here, but barely. He gently lowered the grandmother onto a folded tarp that served as a bed. Her breathing was faint but steady enough that he felt a flicker of hope. He checked her pulse, wrapped her tightly in his jacket, and rubbed her arms to stimulate warmth. "Come on, ma'am," he whispered. "Don't quit on me now." The dog paced anxiously beside them, whining in low, worried tones, nudging her with its nose. It was as though the animal feared she might slip away at any moment. Ethan placed a calming hand on the dog's head. "She's fighting. She's tough." But the shepherd's eyes held a different truth, one sharpened by experience, not optimism. Ethan scanned the shelter again. His instincts prickled. Something didn't add up. This wasn't a random hideout or a collapsed hiker's refuge. The small shelves lined neatly with canned food, the patched holes in the roof, the bucket collecting melted snow. It all pointed to long-term survival. Someone had been living here for months. But why here? Why alone? Why hidden? His gaze drifted toward a worn leather satchel lying near the corner. It was half buried under a blanket, as if someone had tried to hide it in a hurry. He pulled it closer, brushing off the frost. Inside, he found scraps of paper, receipts, maps of nearby forests, and torn pages from a notebook filled with trembling handwriting. Most entries were smudged, water-damaged, beyond recognition. But one phrase repeated again and again. "They can't find us." Us. Plural. Not me. He looked at the woman, then at the dog. The pieces were forming a picture he didn't understand yet, but couldn't ignore. Just then, the dog padded over to a far wall and scratched at a spot near a wooden crate. Ethan walked over, knelt down, and shifted the crate aside. Beneath it was a small metal box. Cold, heavy, locked with a clasp that looked military, not civilian. "What were you hiding out here?" Ethan murmured. The storm howled outside, but inside the shelter, a new chill settled in his bones. Because whatever was inside that box, this old woman had risked her life to protect. Ethan set the metal box aside for the moment. Whatever secrets it held could wait. The woman's breathing had become shallow, her lips trembling with every exhale. Her skin was ice cold, the kind of cold that crept inward and stole a person from the inside out. He knelt beside her, rubbing her arms briskly, checking her pulse again. It fluttered weakly under his fingertips. She didn't have much time. The dog curled tightly against her other side, using its body heat to warm her. Ethan recognized the movement instantly. It wasn't just loyalty. The dog had done this before. He had been her lifeline in nights far colder than this one, holding her together when the world around her wanted her gone. "Stay with me, ma'am," Ethan murmured. "You're safe now." Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing a distant look, like she was seeing somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away. She tried to speak, but only a faint rasp escaped her lips. Ethan leaned closer. They're coming," she whispered. The words were barely audible, carried on a trembling breath. "Who's coming?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but sharp. "Who's after you?" But her eyes rolled slightly, the effort of speaking nearly too much for her. Her fingers twitched against his sleeve, gripping him with surprising strength. "Don't let them take him," she gasped. Ethan frowned. "Take who?" Her gaze drifted toward the dog. That single glance hit him harder than the storm outside. She wasn't protecting herself out here. She was protecting the dog. Before he could ask more, her body tensed. A violent shiver ripped through her. She groaned in pain, curling slightly, her breathing turning ragged and uneven. Ethan recognized the signs immediately. Severe hypothermia, possibly frostbite. But there was something else, something deeper he couldn't diagnose without equipment. He checked her pulse again. It was fading. They needed warmth. They needed a fire. They needed to get out, now. But the storm outside had grown into something monstrous. If he stepped into that blinding white wall with her in this condition, they might not survive a single mile. He grabbed his thermal blanket from his pack, wrapping it tightly around her frail body. "Hold on, please," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The dog let out a soft whine, lowering its head beside her hand. She managed one last breath, her voice barely more than a sigh. "Don't trust them." Then her eyes slid shut again. Not unconscious. Something worse. A heavy silence filled the shelter. Ethan stared at the locked metal box. And for the first time, he realized this rescue wasn't just against nature. It was against something human, and far more dangerous. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. The woman's warning, faint, broken, drenched in fear, echoed in his mind like a chilling command. Don't trust them. Don't let them take him. Whoever they were, whoever him. Was it all pointed in one direction? The dog. Ethan looked at the German Shepherd again. Frost clung to its fur, its ribs visible beneath the thick coat, its eyes tired yet burning with purpose. This wasn't an ordinary stray dog. It was trained, disciplined, and loyal enough to freeze beside a dying woman rather than abandon her. But trained by who? And for what? As Ethan reached out to pet him, his fingers brushed something cold beneath the fur, a metal tag, tucked under the collar. Not a regular ID tag. This one was heavier, rectangular, military style, with precise engraving. Ethan pulled it gently into the light. His heartbeat slowed. His breath caught. This couldn't be right. The tag wasn't a nameplate. It was an operational marker, a classification tag used only for specialized service animals, ones assigned to sensitive missions, ones never meant to be in civilian hands. The engraving was simple but alarming. K922. Restricted unit. Below it, a second line. Do not separate. Ethan stared at it, a cold ripple of recognition running down his spine. He had seen tags like this before, on missions that were erased from official reports, on dogs trained for tasks no ordinary handler would ever understand. These were not pets. They were assets. And whoever controlled them, controlled secrets. The dog slowly lowered its head, as if sensing Ethan's understanding. "Where did you come from, boy?" Ethan whispered. The shepherd blinked slowly, then turned away, walking toward the metal box he had found earlier. It nudged the box with its nose, then looked back at him. Ethan's breath tightened. "This is connected, isn't it?" The dog nudged the box again, harder this time, leaving no doubt. Ethan slid the box toward himself and inspected it more closely. The clasp was military grade, reinforced with a coded lock he hadn't seen in years. It was the kind used for documents too classified to store digitally, objects that could compromise operations if leaked. The storm outside hammered the shelter, shaking the flimsy walls, but inside, the silence grew heavier, sharper. Whatever was inside this box, the woman had protected it with her life. And the dog had been trained to guard it at any cost. Ethan exhaled slowly. "All right, boy," he murmured. "Let's see what they didn't want anyone to find." He reached for his multi-tool. But before he could open the box, a sudden noise outside made the dog stiffen. A crunch in the snow. Footsteps. They weren't alone. The moment Ethan heard the crunch of snow outside, something in him shifted. The cold, the exhaustion, the storm, none of it mattered now. His mind snapped into the same razor-sharp focus he carried on missions. He raised a hand, signaling the dog to stay quiet. To his surprise, the German shepherd obeyed instantly, lowering its body and going perfectly still. Not a twitch, not a sound. Its discipline confirmed what Ethan already suspected. This dog wasn't just special. It had been trained for situations exactly like this. Another sound followed, a sliding shuffle. Then the muffled thud of someone or something, leaning against the outside wall of the shelter. The wooden boards creaked under the pressure. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were searching. They were close. Too close. Ethan stepped away from the woman, positioning himself between her and the entrance. His heartbeat slowed to a soldier's rhythm, steady, calm, controlled. He scanned the small room for anything he could use. A broken wooden plank. A metal rod from a fire pit. Nothing ideal, but enough to defend with if forced. The dog crept beside him, its fur bristling, eyes locked on the door. It didn't growl this time, it was too well trained for that. But its muscles were tense, ready to spring. Ethan placed a hand on its back. "Easy," he whispered. "We don't know who it is yet." But deep down he already knew. No lost hiker would stumble onto a hidden shelter completely buried in snow. No rescuer would approach silently instead of calling out. And no ordinary person would follow footprints in a storm this deadly. This was deliberate. This was pursuit. The door rattled lightly, just enough to test if someone was inside. Ethan's grip tightened on the metal rod. He shifted his stance, ready to strike if the door opened. But then silence. The wind roared again, engulfing the world outside. For a moment, Ethan wondered if the storm had swallowed whoever was out there. But the dog didn't relax. Its ears stayed pinned forward, its eyes sharp. It sensed something lingering in the whiteness, watching, waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly. "We need to move. Staying here isn't safe." He turned to the unconscious woman wrapped in the thermal blanket. Her breaths were shallow, fading. Time was running out. He grabbed his pack, tightened the straps around her body, and secured her gently to his chest in a rescue harness. The dog circled anxiously, ready to guide him again. "We're getting out," Ethan said, voice firm. "But we do this my way." He reached for the metal box. Because whatever danger lurked outside, it was tied to what was locked inside that box. And Ethan wasn't leaving it behind. Ethan tightened the straps, securing the grandmother to his chest, making sure her head was supported and her body insulated as much as possible. Her skin felt frighteningly cold even through the layers of fabric. He brushed a strand of frozen hair from her forehead, hoping, praying, she would hold on long enough for him to get her to safety. But as he reached for his pack, her fingers twitched. He froze. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, drifting through the dim shelter, as though she didn't recognize where she was. Then her eyes shifted upward, finding Ethan's face. She stared at him for a long, trembling moment, as if trying to decide whether he was real or part of whatever nightmare she'd been living. "You came back," she whispered, her voice a fragile breath. Ethan leaned closer. "Ma'am, you're safe. I'm going to get you out of here." But her head moved weakly side to side. "No, no one comes back. Not anymore." Her words hit him like a gust of cold air. "Who are you talking about?" Ethan asked softly. Her gaze shifted toward the dog, the only constant in her fading world. Tears welled in her eyes, thawing into warmth before freezing again. "They took everything from me, except him." The shepherd stepped forward, pressing its head gently against her arm. She tried to lift her hand to touch him, but her strength gave out halfway. Ethan guided her trembling fingers to the dog's fur. She let out a breath, half sob, half relief. "He stayed," she whispered, "even when they tried to break him, even when they said he was defective." Ethan's brow tightened. Defective? A dog trained to military precision like this? That wasn't possible. The woman's breathing quickened. The effort of speaking was draining what little strength she had left, but something inside her refused to stay silent. "They wanted to separate us, take him back, use him again. But he's done enough. He's seen enough." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "They won't stop. Not until they find him, and what he carries." Ethan's heartbeat slowed. "What he carries." Her hand slid weakly from the dog's fur to Ethan's arm, gripping him with a sudden intensity that startled him. Her eyes sharpened, just for a moment, almost glowing with a clarity that cut through her exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "Whatever happens, don't open that box. Not yet. Not until you're somewhere safe. They'll know. They'll come." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle on his chest like a stone. There was more, something deeper, something she desperately wanted to say, but her lips trembled, and her eyes fluttered shut again. "Ma'am," Ethan whispered. No response. The dog let out a low, mournful whine. She wasn't gone, but she was slipping again, and she had left Ethan with a truth he couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a race. Against someone or something who knew exactly what that dog was and wanted him back. The shelter felt eerily silent after the grandmother fell unconscious again. The wind outside howled like a wounded beast, rattling the wooden boards, but inside everything was still, too still. Ethan looked at the German shepherd, who had curled protectively beside her once more. The dog's breathing was steady, its eyes alert and watchful. Not fearful, not confused, but waiting. Ethan crouched down in front of him. "You're not just any dog, are you?" he murmured. He reached slowly for the metal tag again, turning it over in his fingers. K922. Restricted unit. Do not separate. Those words gnawed at him. They weren't warnings. They were orders. Orders used only for animals involved in special operations, missions that required stealth, intelligence, and unfailing loyalty. Ethan had served alongside dogs like this. Dogs who detected explosives buried meters deep. Dogs who tracked fugitives for days without rest. Dogs whose senses and instincts saved lives in places where humans would have died. But the grandmother's words echoed in his mind. They called him defective. Ethan looked into the shepherd's eyes. They were steady, intelligent, deeply aware. There was nothing defective here, unless... He swallowed hard. Unless the defect wasn't physical. Unless it was something else. Something they didn't want. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small portable thermal blanket heater, a compact device he carried for emergencies. As it hummed to life, warming the small shelter, the dog shifted, moving closer to both Ethan and the grandmother. It wasn't just guarding. It was positioning itself, instinctively, like a soldier taking formation. Ethan watched carefully. The precision of the dog's movements, the awareness of its surroundings, the way it reacted to the earlier footsteps outside. No ordinary canine was trained like this. Not even regular military dogs. Only one type was experimental units, prototype programs. The kind most soldiers never even heard about. Ethan's breath tightened. He'd been on missions where whispers floated around. Rumors of a classified canine project that pushed boundaries no ethics board would approve. Dogs enhanced with cutting-edge sensory training. Conditioned for extreme environments. Bred not just for obedience, but for decision-making. But he'd also heard something else. Something darker. Most of those dogs never made it to deployment. The tests were too harsh. The training too unnatural. Some dogs shut down. Others broke. And a few disappeared entirely. He stared at the shepherd. Realization dawning like a slow, painful sunrise. This dog wasn't defective. He escaped. And the grandmother had risked everything to keep him hidden. A sudden gust slammed against the shelter again, making Ethan jump. The dog snapped its head toward the door, ears pricked. They weren't safe. And now Ethan understood exactly why someone was willing to chase them through a deadly blizzard. This dog wasn't just valuable. He was irreplaceable. And whoever created him wanted him back. Ethan secured the grandmother more tightly inside the thermal blanket and adjusted the heater so its warmth spread evenly through the shelter. The temperature inside rose slightly, but the atmosphere grew heavier, thick with questions, with secrets, with the kind of tension that made a soldier's instinct sharpen to a blade's edge. Outside, the blizzard roared like it was trying to swallow the world whole. Inside, the truth was preparing to break open. The grandmother stirred, her eyelids fluttering weakly. Ethan leaned closer. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A faint sound escaped her lips, half a sigh, half a tremor. Slowly, her eyes opened. She blinked, confused, until she saw the German shepherd pressed against her side. Her fingers tightened in his fur. Relief softened her expression, but fear returned quickly, like a shadow she couldn't escape. "They'll come," she whispered, her voice thin and fragile. "They always come." Ethan steadied her shoulder. Who is hunting you?" She swallowed with difficulty, her breath rattling. "People with no conscience, no hesitation. The kind who see living beings as tools." She closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "I worked for them once, before I understood what they truly were." Ethan felt his stomach knot. "You were part of the program?" he asked quietly. Her eyes opened again, shining with guilt. "Not willingly. I was a technician. Behavioral development. They told us we were helping create elite rescue dogs, animals capable of doing what humans couldn't. We believed them," her voice cracked, "until we learned what they really wanted." She took a trembling breath. They were weaponizing them. Ethan felt a cold ripple through his chest, not from a storm, but from something far more threatening. "They trained them to ignore pain," she continued, tears forming. "To operate in environments that destroy most living things. To detect threats before they existed. To obey commands no moral soldier would ever give." Her grip tightened on the dog. "And when a dog failed a test, they didn't try to rehabilitate it. She broke off, shaking. The dog nuzzled her hand gently. Ethan understood the unfinished sentence. He had seen enough in the world to fill in the darkness himself. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "Not after I saw what they planned next." She touched the shepherd's neck, was their most advanced prototype. Too smart for them to control. Too compassionate to be a weapon. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Compassion. The very thing they labeled defective. "So you ran," he said. She nodded weakly. "I stole him. I destroyed everything I could. Files, research, tracking codes. But they rebuilt. They always rebuild." Her voice grew thinner, fading. "They won't stop until they have him again. And when they do, the world won't understand what they've unleashed." Ethan glanced at the door, where faint, muffled noises still echoed beyond the storm. The threat was closer than ever. And now he finally knew why. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a war. And the first battle had already begun. The grandmother's last words still echoed in Ethan's mind as he rose to his feet. The shelter suddenly felt smaller, the walls thinner, the darkness outside heavier. He had been in dangerous situations before, ambushes, firefights, missions gone wrong in foreign deserts and frozen oceans. But this threat felt different. It wasn't chaos or war. It was something calculated, silent, methodical. The dog's ears flicked toward the door. A soft growl vibrated in its throat, not loud, not warning, but acknowledging what Ethan already sensed. Someone was out there. Ethan moved quietly, checking the shelter's only entrance. Snow piled against the lower half, but the top portion was loose, as if someone had tested it minutes earlier. He pressed his palm against the wood. Cold, but not the natural cold of a storm. This chill carried weight, like danger lingering just beyond the threshold. He turned to the grandmother. "How many are they?" "Too many," she whispered. "But only one needs to find you before the rest come." Ethan's jaw clenched. There was no time to lose. He checked his gear, limited supplies, no weapons except his knife and the metal rod he'd grabbed earlier. Against trained pursuers, it wasn't enough. But he had something they didn't: experience in surviving the impossible and a highly advanced dog whose instincts were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Another sound sliced through the storm. A snapping branch. A boot crushing ice. Ethan's pulse deepened. He gestured to the dog. It moved silently to his side, posture rigid, eyes locked on the door. The grandmother watched with fear and trust tangled in her expression. "They track by heat signatures," she said weakly. "The storm slows them, but it won't stop them. They'll find the shelter soon." Ethan scanned the room. Only one exit. No windows. Nowhere to hide. They needed to move. But carrying the grandmother through the storm with pursuers close behind was a deadly gamble. Staying meant death. Running meant risk. Neither option was good, but only one left a chance. He tightened the straps, securing the grandmother to his chest again. Her body sagged lightly, drifting in and out of consciousness. The dog nudged her hand before stepping to the entrance, placing itself between Ethan and whatever lurked outside. Ethan took a slow breath. "All right, boy. You lead. I follow." He braced his shoulder against the door, preparing to push into the blizzard, when a shadow moved outside. A human silhouette. Tall. Still. Watching. Ethan froze. The figure didn't approach. Didn't call out. Didn't move at all. It simply stood there, as if waiting, assessing. Then, it took one step forward. The dog growled, low and dangerous. Ethan's grip tightened on the metal rod. This wasn't a rescue team. This wasn't a lost traveler. Whoever was out there had found them, and the storm was no longer the most dangerous thing in the mountains. The shape outside the shelter stood unnaturally still, not hunched from a cold, not shielding itself from a storm, just waiting, as if the blizzard didn't matter. Ethan knew immediately. This person wasn't struggling to survive. They were trained for this weather, prepared, equipped. The grandmother's breathing hitched against his chest. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The dog pressed close to the door, muscles coiled like a spring, eyes blazing with a sharpness Ethan had only seen in elite military dogs during combat. Ethan motioned for the dog to stay low. Then he positioned himself slightly to the side of the doorway, never directly in front of it, where a clear shot could meet him. His instincts screamed that whoever stood outside wasn't alone. There were more shadows hidden in the storm, movements too subtle for ordinary eyes to catch. The figure took another slow step forward. Snow whipped around their silhouette, but something in the posture was familiar, deliberate, predatory, and hauntingly calm. Ethan recognized the pattern. He had seen men step like that before, men who hunted human beings for a living, but he tightened his grip on the metal rod, though he knew it was a poor weapon against professionals. Still, he wasn't about to surrender. Not while the grandmother clung to life. Not while the dog, shaking with cold yet refusing to yield, stood ready to defend her. Then, breaking through the roar of the storm, a voice called out. Calm, steady, terrifying. Hand over the asset. The word struck Ethan like a blow. Asset, not dog, not living being. Asset. The dog growled, a deep, primal sound vibrating through the shelter floor. It knew that voice, and it feared it. Not with cowardice, but with memory. Dark memory. Ethan shouted back, not happening. The silhouette remained silent for a moment. Then, you don't understand what you're protecting. Ethan didn't lower his weapon. I understand enough. The storm gusted hard enough to rattle the shelter's boards. Snow blasted between the cracks, stinging Ethan's skin. The dog stepped beside him now, no longer waiting, taking position as if anticipating what came next. This wasn't a simple standoff anymore. This was preparation for impact. A second figure appeared in the storm. Then a third. Their outlines barely visible, but unmistakable. Surrounding the shelter. Closing in. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. A soldier's calm, descending like a curtain. He looked at the dog. "You ready?" The shepherd didn't bark. It didn't hesitate. It simply met Ethan's gaze and lowered its body, muscles tightening with precise training born from a dark past. The grandmother stirred faintly, whispering, "Don't let them take him, please." Ethan placed one hand on the door. Behind him, the dog braced. Outside, shadows crept closer. He drew one slow breath, then pushed the door open and walked into the white fury of the storm. The battle had begun. The storm swallowed Ethan the moment he stepped outside. Snow ripped across his face in violent sheets, stinging his skin, blurring everything except the faint shapes of the figures circling the shelter. The dog exploded out beside him, silent, fast, precise, its body low to the ground as it scanned the white chaos. Ethan felt the grandmother's weight strapped to his chest, every shallow breath reminding him what he had to protect. A voice cut through the wind. "Last chance. Hand over the asset. Walk away alive." Ethan ignored it. He moved sideways, away from the shelter's direct line. His boots sank deep into the drifts, each step a fight, but he kept going, searching for any advantage. The dog barked sharply, one single pointed sound, then bolted a few feet to the left. It stopped suddenly, digging frantically through the snow. "What is it, boy?" Ethan muttered. The shepherd didn't look back. Instead, it scraped the ground with frantic precision, revealing something hidden beneath the snow, a faded wooden ladder, its rungs barely visible, leading downward. Ethan's heartbeat surged. A trapdoor. A bunker. Something the grandmother had never mentioned. The dog barked again, louder this time, then ran back to him, tugging at his pant leg. It wasn't just showing him. It was begging him to move. Behind him, a gunshot cracked through the storm. A bullet hissed past, burying itself in a tree trunk. The figures were no longer waiting. They were advancing. Fast. Ethan made a split-second decision. He sprinted toward the uncovered ladder, the dog racing ahead of him. Snow exploded at his feet as another shot tore through the storm, missing by inches. Ethan yanked open the trapdoor. It groaned with age, but opened enough for him to slip inside with the grandmother. The dog leaped in after him, just as a third shot hit the wooden frame above. Ethan pulled the trapdoor shut, plunging them into near darkness. Only the faint light of his flashlight pierced the underground room. Dust floated in the stale air. Old crates lined the walls. Maps, notes, supplies. But one thing froze him completely. A table in the center of the bunker. And, on it, a small metal device shaped like a USB drive, labeled with the same classification code as the dog's tag. K922. The grandmother's voice drifted weakly from his chest. "Don't let them take it." Ethan stared at the device, realization crashing through him. It wasn't the dog they wanted. Not entirely. It was the data, hidden, priceless, dangerous, containing everything the grandmother had stolen from the program. Training logs, genetic modifications, behavioral overrides, proof of what they had done, proof the world could never ignore. The dog pressed against Ethan's leg, eyes locked on him, waiting for his decision. And Ethan finally understood the truth. Saving the grandmother wasn't the mission. Saving the dog wasn't enough either. He was holding the key to destroying the entire program, if he survived long enough to use it. The underground bunker trembled as footsteps pounded on the trapdoor above. Snow filtered through the cracks with every impact, dust shaking loose from the wooden beams. Ethan held the grandmother close, shielding her frail body with his own while the dog positioned itself at the foot of the ladder. Silent, ready, unbreakable. The small metal device sat on the table, glowing faintly under the flashlight's beam like a heartbeat of truth waiting to be unleashed. Above them, voices shouted orders. "Find another entry. They're down there. Retrieve the asset at any cost. Ethan's jaw clenched. Time was over. Hiding was no longer an option. Survival required something else now: exposure. The one thing their enemies feared most. He grabbed the device, tucking it deep into a protected inner pocket. Then he scanned the bunker for anything useful. There, an emergency escape tunnel at the far end, almost invisible behind a tarp and a stack of crates. The grandmother had prepared this place far better than he realized. She didn't expect to win a fight. She expected to flee one. Ethan lifted her gently, securing her against his chest once more. "Hang on," he whispered. "We're almost there." The dog barked once, short, urgent, and ran to the tunnel entrance. Ethan followed, ducking low as gunfire erupted above, bullets splintering the trapdoor. Any second now, they would break in. He crawled into the tunnel, the dog right behind him, guiding him through the narrow passage. The walls were damp, icy, carved crudely through dirt and stone. Every movement echoed. Every second felt stolen. But ahead, a faint glow. Moonlight. They spilled out onto a slope shielded by thick pines. The storm still raged, but the trees broke enough of the wind for Ethan to move. He staggered to his feet and pushed forward. The dog led the way, stopping often to make sure Ethan followed, never once faltering. Behind them, distant shouts echoed. They knew the tunnel. They were closing in. Ethan reached the ridge's edge, breath sharp and raw. He pulled a flare from his pack, one he carried for last resort rescues, and fired it into the sky. A crimson streak tore through the storm. Another followed. Then another. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was calling for help and exposing everything. Minutes felt like hours until, through the swirling snow, floodlights cut across the sky. A rescue helicopter. Then another. Someone had seen the flares. Someone had responded. As the helicopters landed, Ethan surrendered the device to federal authorities, not just the data inside, but the truth the grandmother had risked her life to reveal. Medics lifted her onto a stretcher, rushing her inside the aircraft. The dog jumped in beside her, refusing to leave. Hours later, in a warm hospital room, a doctor approached Ethan with a soft smile. "She made it. She's going to be all right." Ethan exhaled a breath he'd been holding for far too long. The dog rested at the grandmother's bedside, eyes finally calm, tail gently wagging. A nurse handed Ethan a note, the grandmother's handwriting shaky but clear. "Thank you for saving us, for giving him a future. He trusted you when no one else could." Ethan gently scratched behind the shepherd's ears. "You're a hero, boy," he whispered. "And your story isn't ending here." Outside, news crews gathered. The world wanted answers. And for the first time, the truth was finally coming to light. This story reminds us that true courage isn't just found on the battlefield. It's found in compassion, loyalty, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Ethan proved that doing the right thing can save lives, even when the truth is dangerous. The grandmother showed that one act of bravery can protect others, no matter how impossible the odds. And the dog taught us that loyalty is a powerful force, capable of guiding us through even the darkest storms. Together, they reveal that every life has value, and sometimes, the smallest protector carries the biggest truth.